Antonio Brown's been a year removed from the NFL, and you cannot tell me right now if he were to play on a football field this season, he wouldn't be at least a top 10 receiver in the league after missing a whole year, still at 32 years old. I think he still got it, and once a team signs him, I think he will be the reason that team becomes there's a lot better team this upcoming year than they were the year before. How you guys doing? It is Monday, July 20th, 2020. Out here in this quarantine, I'm James Sims. And for this edition of The Elite, I was going to do a profile on Antonio Brown. And if you're not following the news or like ESPN, Antonio Brown is currently a 32-year-old wide receiver who is not currently playing on an NFL team, but was most recently playing on the Oakland Raiders and the New England Patriots in 2019. Didn't get to finish the season with a lot of other stuff that he had to deal with. But if you were talking about what he is right now, he's a 5'10", 185-pound wide receiver who works incredibly hard, and you can see he's one of the league quarterbacks from just like off the line of scrimmage. He has amazing separation, amazing speed, and he's one of the league's best route runners. He can catch almost any single ball. You can see that he works incredibly hard. Every single video that isn't him wiling out on a police video or him on the football field, he's definitely working out, and the NFL shows it. Or the NFL, his NFL teammates, his colleagues are aware of that. And when it's over, I think Antonio Brown's going to be in the Hall of Fame as one of the best wide receivers this game's ever seen. And I think the fact that he's not on the team right now is because, I mean, it's a lot of other sociological factors, but you can't tell me it's because of his behavior. I mean, there are a lot of other crazier players that have been under contract for a lot of other wild things. And Antonio Brown is still a peak elite athlete, still kind of in the prime of his athleticism. So just to get into it, the 5'10" receiver originally came up out of Miami, and then he eventually went to Central Michigan for college. At Central Michigan, he was named the first to the first team All MAC his last 2 years, and along with the Special Teams Player of the Year. He was second team All MAC in 2007. He was first team All MAC in 2008, 2009, when he was also named a first team All American in all football, especially coming out of Central Michigan. He would go on to get drafted in the sixth round of the 2010 pick with the 195th overall pick by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and from then his career would go on and be history. His very first season in Pittsburgh, he would start 0 of the 9 games he played in. He finished with 167 yards on 16 receptions for the season with Big Ben as his quarterback. That year, the Steelers would finish 12-4 and win the AFC North. This year, they would go on to beat the Ravens in the divisional playoffs. They beat the Jets in the conference finals. They would go on to lose against the Packers in the Super Bowl, and this is the year that Troy Polamalu won Defensive Player of the Year. This is the farthest the Steelers have gotten since Antonio Brown has been there, but they were still a playoff team while Antonio Brown was there under Mike Tomlin. So at this point, he hasn't really made a name for himself, but he already made it to the NFL, and as a sixth-round receiver, he had already made it into like the regular game rotation by the end of the season. Going into his age 21 season, Antonio Brown went on to start 3 of the 16 games for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he would go on to be a Pro Bowler in a season where the Pittsburgh Steelers finished second in the AFC North with a 12-4 record, and they went on to lose to the Broncos in overtime to Tim Tebow on that one pass. But in this season, in Antonio Brown's first Pro Bowl season, he would finish the season with 1,108 yards and 63 receptions, 2 touchdowns on the season. And just added on with his rushing totals, he finished with 1,149 yards on the season. And even though he started 3 games, he had a total of 1,100 receiving yards in his second season for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that made it to the playoffs. So with that, he was named to the Pro Bowl for the very first time in his career. Wasn't named to any all-pro teams, but he was at this point, he was being recognized as one of the league's best players. Going on to 2012. He would go on to miss the Pro Bowl this year, as he would go on to start 10 of the 13 games this season. He would go on to finish with 66 receptions for 787 yards, but he would finish with 5 touchdowns, his most touchdowns in a season up to date. The Steelers that year would finish with an 8-8 record, and they'd miss the playoffs completely. Brown wouldn't win any accolades or awards, but within his first 3 years of the league, he's shown that when he played every game, even if he didn't start, he was still one of the league's best and still being named as a Pro Bowl. And even going into 2012, like he started 10 of the 13 games he played. So there were 3 games he didn't start. You didn't really get to see him becoming a full-time starter until 2014, or until even the next year. Going into 2013, Antonio Brown in his age 25 season would go on to start 14 of the 16 games, in a season where the Steelers finished 8-8 for the second year in a row and missed the playoffs for the second time. But Antonio Brown would go on to clinch his second straight Pro Bowl. He would finish the season with 110 receptions for 1,499 yards and 8 touchdowns, the most receptions, yards, and touchdowns up to date. Even though the Steelers would miss the playoffs, Antonio Brown would finish the season being named to the second team All-Pro for the only time in his career. And this is 4 years into the league. He has already been named a Pro Bowler twice. And as a second team All-Pro wide receiver, he was already being recognized as, if not the best or the second best, he was being recognized as the third or the fourth best wide receiver in the NFL. And even though the Steelers were making the playoffs, Antonio Brown was one of the big reasons that the Steelers were as good as they were. And this would start a run in where Antonio Brown would continue to be recognized as one of the league's best. In 2014, Antonio Brown would be named a Pro Bowler for the third time in his career, and he'd be named a first-team All-Pro wide receiver for the very first time in his career. After starting 16 games for the Steelers in a season in which they finished 11-5, winning the AFC North. This season, Antonio Brown finished the season leading the league in receptions with 129 receptions. He led the league with receiving yards for the first time in his career with 1,698 receiving yards. He finished with 13 touchdowns on the season, his most up to date, including receptions and yards. And his adding and rushing totals, he finished with 1,700 total yards and 13 touchdowns on the entire season. And this season, like I said, the Steelers would go on to finish 11-5, but they would lose to the Ravens in the wild card after winning the NFC North. And of course, that season, Antonio Brown, for the first time in his career, was named the receiving yards leader after being the receptions leader, which is something hard to double down in the same season. And he was named to the first team All-Pro, being recognized as one of the league's either the league's best receiver or the league's other best receiver. And at this time, this is when Julio Jones started jumping up because he wasn't a first-team All-NFL receiver yet. So Antonio Brown hit that level, but 2015-16, that's when you start to see the comparisons between him and Julio Jones, because even up until now, Julio Jones has still been an all-time wide receiver, and Antonio Brown is the only receiver that's really kept pace with him in this time ever since they both stepped in the league throughout the 2020s. So continuing on to 27, and even by then, he has already been recognized as one of the league's best wide receivers. He would go on to earn his third straight Pro Bowl appearance, his fourth in the last 5 seasons, or invitation at least. He will be named a second or first team All-Pro in the NFL for the second year in his career, starting all 16 games in a season where the Steelers finished 10-6, second in the AFC North. He would go on to finish that season with 136 receptions, leading the league in receptions for the second year in a row. He finished with 1,834 receiving yards that season, the most receiving yards he's had in a season. He didn't finish with the league lead as he finished second to Julio, but he still finished with 10 touchdowns on the season. And with everything combined, the Steelers, like I said, that season would finish by beating the Bengals in the wild card, and they would lose in the divisional round to the Broncos. But the Steelers were definitely coming back, and Antonio Brown had come back for a repeat performance as one of the league's best. And like I said, he was named he's named either the best receiver or the second best receiver for the second straight year, and this would continue into his 2016 season. His age 28 season, he would start 15 games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is the third time they've won the AFC North, and Antonio Brown being there. And this is the farthest. This would be the best team that they would have, at least while Antonio Brown was in Pittsburgh, other than the next season, but I'll get into that in a bit. But this season, Antonio Brown would go on to be named a first-team All-Pro wide receiver, either the best receiver or the second best receiver in the league for the third year in a row. He would finish in the 15 games that he started, he finished with 106 receptions. The fourth year in a row, he finished with over 100 receptions. He finished with 1,204 yards. He would go on to finish with 12 touchdowns, the second most in his career at that time. And with everything combined, he would go on to, like I said, be named one of the league's 2 best wide receivers for the third year in a row after being named a Pro Bowler for the 5th time in the last 6 seasons. And the only season in which he didn't, he started 10 out of 13 games, which is difficult. But once again, it just shows the dominance of Antonio Brown, especially in the peak of his career. And of course, this reign of being a first team All Pro wide receiver would continue into his next season. His age 29 season, Antonio Brown would start 14 games in a season with the Pittsburgh Steelers, finished 13-3, their best regular season since he's been there. They were going to lose the divisional playoffs to the Jags, and at this point they had not won. They had the farthest they had gotten under Antonio Brown was the Super Bowl in his first season, and they haven't really been back. They lost the AFC Championship to the Patriots the prior year, but that's kind of where the Steelers kind of found their end in 2017. But this season, in the 14 games that he played, Antonio Brown finished with 100 receptions for the 5th straight time in his career. He finished leading the league in receiving yards with 1,533, finishing with 9 touchdowns, averaging 109 yards per game, 15.2 yards per touches. And at this point, going into his 30th season, after the Steelers playoff run, because this would be the end. This would be the last time Antonio Brown would make the playoffs on an NFL roster, at least up until or at least up to date. But especially up until now, if you're looking at his career and you're seeing that it's 8 years in, he's made 6 Pro Bowls, 5 in a row at this time, and the last 4 years before that, he was named one of the 2 best receivers in the league, and especially out of the thousands of people that play wide receiver in football, somewhat in America, Antonio Brown has proven himself to be one of the top 2 in 4 consecutive seasons. And the season before he went on that 4-year streak, he was a second team. He was the 3rd or the 4th best receiver. He's finished at this point, and then, but I'll continue. Going on to his age 30 season, this would be the last Pro Bowl he would make, as he was named to his 7th Pro Bowl in his 9th season. In his age 30 season, he would start 15 games for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that would finish 9-6-1, second in the AFC North, but they would miss the playoffs completely. He would finish with 104 receptions. For the 6th time in his career, he'd finish with over 100 yards, and once again, he finished with 1,297. The 6th straight time he finished with over 1,200 yards in a season, which I don't understand. I don't know if you guys know, but that's incredibly difficult to do. He led the league in receiving touchdowns with his career high 15 touchdowns in his age 30 season. And despite the Steelers not making the playoffs, Antonio Brown, like I said, was named a Pro Bowler for the 6th straight year in a row. And even though he wasn't named to an all-NFL team, he was still being recognized as one of the league's best receivers. And that was the only time in his career he's ever led the league in receiving touchdowns for the year. And then going into his most recent season, where he was originally signed with the Oakland Raiders, and then he was originally cut before the season started, especially with issues dealing with his owner. He would then move on to New England, where he played 1 game for the New England Patriots. He finished with 4 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown catch from Tom Brady in that one season. He would go on to only play 1 game before a whole nother issue ended his stint in New Orleans. And as of right now, Antonio Brown is a free agent. But if you're looking at what Antonio Brown is as an individual player, considering he's 32 and he's still an amazing athlete, I don't know if he's going to put up numbers compared to his prime, but not many receivers in their primes can put up what Antonio Brown did. I imagine he's going to get signed. He's going to choose to sign a 1-year or 2-year, a really short-term contract deal with a contender. The 2 teams I've heard are the Baltimore Ravens and the Seattle Seahawks, especially with the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson. I imagine that he would more likely want to go to the Ravens with his cousin Hollywood Brown and Lamar Jackson, and the newly forming Baltimore Ravens defense, especially around Earl Thomas. I'm curious to see what Antonio Brown does this upcoming season. But if you're him right now, you're looking back on his 10-year season, 10-year career that he's been in the league. Most NFL careers don't even last that long. In his 10 years played, he's played for a playoff team. He's missed the playoffs 4 times, and he's missed the playoffs 3 times in full seasons that he's played. He has 7 Pro Bowls to date. He was named to the second team All-Pro once in those 10 years, and he was named to the first team All-Pro, as in the best receiver or the second best receiver, 5 times. So 5 of his 10 years in the league, he was recognized as a top 4 wide receiver in the league with 32 different teams, and he was recognized as the top 2 for 4 straight years. I don't understand how you can see that as being elite. And considering his last full season, he put up 1,300 yards and fifth and led the league in touchdown receptions. I have no reason to think that Antonio Brown is just going to stop now and retire. But to be honest, without a lot of the media stuff that's been going on the last year, I think if he retires the helmet and cleats, he's a Hall of Famer right now. I think he does have more to prove. I mean, he still has like an MVP to win. There are wide receivers that have won the award. He hasn't won a championship. But I think with seven Pro Bowls, 6 back to back, and 4 of them being a first team All NFL like receiver, especially a wide receiver, he's gonna be. He's gonna be in the Hall. There's not even a question as to if he's gonna be a first ballot. And I have no idea what team he's gonna join. But this dude is still a Hall of Famer playing while still being an elite receiver. And I think if he does land on his feet on a program, I imagine that he's still gonna, if he plays the full season, I imagine he will still be a top 5 receiver in football once he comes back. And to me, when I look back at the 2010s, especially when I remember Julio Jones, I'm always gonna remember Antonio Brown, because they were both their careers were kind of foils of one another, but they both ended up with virtually no MVPs, no championships, but they both ended up being the best wide receivers in the league at their times. And I don't know, I hope Antonio Brown and Julio Jones enter the Hall at the exact same time, because their careers have basically been linked forever. And if you ever get a chance to peep my boy Antonio Brown, if he does step foot in the league again, just by watching him play, just ask yourself if you've seen how many other receivers you can see that are his size, that literally do more than him, that you can see like in a football game. There aren't that many. And I think that if he would have stayed with the Patriots, it would have been a completely different team last year. But that's hypotheticals. He's currently not on a team right now, and he's looking to join a contender, especially at the age of 32, when his retirement could come at any time, considering he's a wide receiver. With that all said, I appreciate you for listening to all 18 minutes of this, and I feel like I've said my piece. There's not much more to say. Antonio Brown is one of the league's most elite wide receivers, and despite the fact that he's been out the league for a year, he could come back and still torch the other receivers in the league. With that said, I think I've said my piece. Peace out.